you know, I was always been athletic. I played soccer since I was 5. I rowed crew in university as well, played for the University of Toronto, played soccer. Um, I decided to start wearing hijab when I was 20, and that affected uh, a lot of things. It literally affected the trajectory of my soccer career. And I had kids. I have 4, alhamdulillah, kids, and just sort of in that same time as I was coaching, I was always committed to coaching young girls in soccer specifically. Did that for a really long time. I still continue to play. I still play right now. And I think it just shaped, sports has really shaped who I am. I worked frontline with survivors of violence and immigrant and refugee women in Canada, and even used sports as a way to sort of help people with recovery. We know sports can be a connector and a tool for healing. Did that. And then I had been blogging for a little bit about soccer and following the FIFA ban on hijab, which impacted me. It came later, but it impacted my life. And my little blog started to take off. Like, I literally thought it was just me and my mother reading it. And on Tumblr, and this is in 2012. And it started to get picked up. And academics, notably someone named Laurent Dubois at Duke University, who's now a very good friend, he had picked it up because he had never seen somebody with hijab writing so publicly, because there's no space for us. We're literally nowhere in sports media. Well, back then, this is like almost 10 years ago, right? Now there's a couple more, very few, but there are some of us, and I'm South Asian as well. So, you know, there was very few, you know, Afghan or Pakistani or Indian subcontinental women out there that are Muslim. So that became a thing. And then I was lucky, alhamdulillah, to have the opportunity to connect with different people who gave me a shot. I think the first piece I ever co-wrote that was published was with my mentor, Dave Zirin, who's the sports editor at the Nation. And we co-wrote a piece about the Palestinian national men's soccer team winning the AFC championship, and what a big deal that was. And I remember, Hanif, I wrote this piece and I sent it to him, and I felt like I was going to throw up because I was so nervous. I still feel like that sometimes, but I was so nervous because it was the first piece, and he loved it. And he made, you know, he tweaked it, obviously, because he's a seasoned writer. And I was so proud of it, alhamdulillah. So, I mean, since then, I don't write from one specific paper. I freelance, and that's by choice as well. I have 4 kids, and they take a priority. So working from home has always been very important to me, and driving them around to soccer and volleyball and attending everything and cheering wildly and madly on the sidelines is kind of, you know, it's been very important to me. So I've been able to try to balance. My children are older, alhamdulillah. So traveling has now really picked up in the last 3-4 years, like a lot.
Wonderful. I mean, your life story is so amazing, and and you're juggling so many different things. And from the looks of it, from the pure view of the outside looking in, it looks like you're handling it pretty well. So I want to go back to some early events that happened in your life. One, because I believe, you know, your early life really kind of sets you up and paves the way for where you'll be in the future. And I want to talk about 2 events that happened early in your life. One is your mother's encounter with racism when you were about 5 years old. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think there's a lot. I mean, there's not one specific one. Is there a specific one that you're talking about that I might have mentioned? Because like,
yeah, you said that when you were about 5 years old, you remember your mother having a particular incident that really kind of stuck out with you.
Right. I think one of them was my mother's been, you know, she was a trained physician in Pakistan, and then she moved to Canada, where her training and all of her education was not recognized. So essentially she had to retrain. There've been many incidents when I've been with her, stuff like her being, you know, one's very common. If you go and you grow up in a place where there's not a large community of people of color, and not necessarily only immigrants, but just people of color generally, regardless if you're from an immigrant experience or not, people raise their voices at you because they assume you don't speak English, or they'll assume that you're unread if you don't speak English. And there's a very big distinction. It's very, very possible and likely to be extremely educated and not speak English. Like the inference here is that English is the be all language of everything, and it's not. You can be very well versed in many, many subjects and not speak English. It's fine. So I think it was one pivotal moment is when I'm with her, because my mother stayed at home until I was 7, and then she went back to work to requalify to be a physician. So one specifically was someone challenging her on her linguistic ability. And that has always struck me, because my mother is meticulous in everything, including language, be it Urdu, be it, be it English, be it whatever, if she's speaking with patients, if she's speaking with anybody, and the amount of disrespect and the way in which she handled it. And my mother is not one of those people that if she's disrespected will be like, oh, turn the other cheek and be nice, like kill them with kindness. No, I'm sorry, we don't work that way, like, and respect to those that choose that path. But my mother was very clear on who she is, what she does, and what her vision is. And other people don't affect that. Obviously, you internalize some of it at some point, to, because to be disrespected publicly is humiliating and in front of your child. But there's none of that. And then as soon as she started speaking, the woman was like stunned. And I think that that's always stayed with me. And I think a lot of how I interact, I live in a city that's incredibly diverse. Toronto is a beautiful place to raise children, alhamdulillah. It's not monotonous or monolithic in one type of demographic like I was brought up. But that has impacted me tremendously in the way that I carry myself. I mean, I'm a sports writer. I find myself in white-only spaces, men only, white only, all the time. I don't have to tell you that. I mean, you know what the sports industry looks like. And for someone who is very identifiably Muslim, I don't fit in there. And that takes me back to childhood. Like, I've not fit in my entire life. So I'm used to it.
So that incident there had a profound effect on you. Now talk about your own first encounter where you experienced racism when you were about 10 or 11 years old on the pitch.
Yeah, this was quite harrowing. It's something that I think I grew up in I knew I was different. Like, I always knew I was different. My parents, just didn't think that was challenge enough. So they put me in a complete French school. So just because it wasn't enough to be different as is, but, and I appreciate that because I'm multilingual. And I think that's very important in the travel. It helps, certainly. Alhamdulillah. And I went for Hajj a couple of years ago, and I was being able to talk to all the West Africans and North Africans out there. So like, I had a good time. But I was I was racially abused when I was 11. And I remember very clearly, like it was yesterday. It was kind of cold and gray, as it often is in Nova Scotia in early summer. And I was standing in the box because it was a set piece. It was a corner kick. And for those that don't know soccer talk, and I'm a forward, and I'm pretty, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what my job is. And she called me a smelly, and then, a word that's used to debase and demean people that are South Asian. And I was stunned. I think I was stunned for a couple of minutes, like not a couple of minutes, it's a very long time, like a couple seconds at least. But then my visceral reaction was to punch her, which is what I did. I'm 11 years old. I don't know how to punch. No one's taught me how to punch. So I ended up wrapping my fingers around my thumb. And y'all, this is not how you punch, so don't do this. I punched her like this. So I ended up spraining my own thumb. And I ended up being ejected from the game because the ref didn't see or hear what she said to me, but he saw what I did to her and that I felt her. So I was 11 years old. And what ended up happening was that I got suspended for 2 games. We lost that game. My coach was furious. And when I look back at it now, it's just another way that the system always fails kids, on the racialized children and marginalized kids, because it doesn't know how to deal with any of it. He didn't know how to deal with it at all. He chalked it up to me just being mad. But I'm like, do you understand why I was mad? But nobody was asking those questions. And my parents weren't there at the time. So I went home and I told them what happened. And, my mother was like, she really wanted to go to the office and talk to, like, go to the club and talk to them and say, like, this is unacceptable. But nobody had heard. And the problem was that nobody spoke up either. Everybody heard what she said to me. That was like within 5 feet. Nobody said anything. Also, I was angry at the time about that, but I don't expect also kids who have not been shown how to be not racist know how to lead the charge on this. 11 is like you're prepubescent. You kind of, you know, if you ask a 6-year-old, they'll tell you straight up, right? 11 is a little bit different. And I think that society is inherently can be racist with the way that's embedded into systems. And if you don't make an effort to talk to your kids about it, they're not going to unlearn. And these parents clearly had not. And those kids had no idea. Like, I have very conscientious conversations with my son and with my daughter on how to be allies for different communities. This is very important to me because of the messaging they receive, particularly my sons, about women and how to be respectful and how to think of them as classmates and coworkers, and, you know, be respectful, not be dismissive, not do this, and how to be a good ally. This is very important to me. But at that time, nobody said anything. So I was really, really held out on my own. And this was a team that I was very close to. So that was very painful for me to sort of, and it's something that's carried me because soccer has always been my happy place, always. And right now, this is the longest that I've not played soccer since I had an ACL tear. So it's the longest I've been away from the pitch. And we have Zoom calls. I have Zoom calls with my team. So we find out how each other is doing, share the gossip, talk about what's going on, the politics at the club, like what's happening in the league, what's going on. But they've become very close to me. And again, I'm the only Muslim woman in my league. I'm the only one of only 2 women who are women of color on my team. And again, I'm in spaces because my generation, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but let's just say my generation was never influenced and encouraged to stay in sports past a certain age. The emphasis was studying, but I was very lucky. I had 2 parents that knew and recognized that sport was a very big part of me. So encouraged me to continue. And I'm very, very lucky. Alhamdulillah, very, very lucky.
You know, one thing about sports that's so beautiful, there's a lot of life lessons that you can learn, and there's a lot of teachable moments. And I know with this particular experience, you know, you elaborated on so many different things about how that incident was handled. So let's talk a bit first about how your parents handled the situation. You said your father introduced you to Jackie Robinson and pointed out you know, what he went through. So talk a little bit about how your parents were able to support you and what their reaction was, and versus the coach and the administrators that were around that situation.
Well, I mean, they were very upset on my behalf because I was a sobbing mess when I came home. Like, I remember the ride home, you know, those old station wagons with the polyester seats and your legs are sticking to the seats because they're so hot. There's no air conditioning, and you put on the air conditioning and air and it blows out hot air. It's just gross. It's muggy. So the whole ride was terrible. I was a mess. And I just remember bawling my eyes out and being home, and I was part of a carpool system. So the coach didn't talk to me the whole way home. It was about 25 minutes. It was brutal. I got home and my dad was like, what happened? And, you know, my mom, thank God, was there because she worked a lot. And so she was home, and I remember telling them what had happened. And I think very soon after I got home, there was a call to my parents, but I had already shared what had happened. So it was, I think, either the coach or the assistant coach that called my dad to say, like, she punched somebody, she can't do it. And my dad's like, no, she can. She did. And do you understand why? And the coach is like, well, nobody heard her do it. And my dad's like, she's not a player that has ever done this before. Have you inquired as to why? And the coach started to say, well, we can't really think about that because then we'll just be excusing the behavior. And my dad's like, it's not about excusing the behavior. It's about understanding where it came from. And when I heard, he was very polite with this particular coach, but he also wasn't going to have any of this nonsense. And my mother was just a little bit more like, you know, we're going to go down to the clubhouse. We're going to talk to them. We're going to figure this out. But then in that, my dad said to me later, we're having dinner, or it was later that night. And he said, you know, you're not the first and you're not the last. He's like, people have just for existing. And he told me about Jackie Robinson. And I've never followed a lot of baseball, so I didn't know much about Jackie Robinson other than what I had read in historical textbooks and class and whatnot. You know, my dad talked about Muhammad Ali and talked about who he was and how he was unapologetic. And he said, and this is something that stays with me till this day, don't let other people tell you what your issues are. Muhammad Ali believed that not fighting for the United States and imperial force and going back and killing people who were innocent was his issue. He didn't wait for society to say, oh, okay, you should be mad about racism or homophobia or sexism. He was like, this is important to me and this is my issue. My dad's like, your identity. If this issue is important to you, it is important, period. And this is something I say to kids all the time when I speak publicly, and people, don't let other people dictate what's important to you. If you feel this is important and this is something that really hits you, it's important. And, you know, that I definitely got from my dad. He talked a lot about that. He talked about other, he talked about other great athletes. I found out about Nawal al-Mutakawwal, who's like a Moroccan runner. When I grew up and I started to do my history and my research, I realized the droves of people who came. I mean, you know, Dr. John Carlos and Tommy Smith in '68. Then I found out about the women, the Dr. Amira Rose Davis, who is my beloved colleague and co-host. She's a associate professor at Penn State. And she, you know, really introduced me to the idea of history and what marginalized women did. And there was a long history. And even if me saying this is not okay, I'm 11, but I know this is wrong and I won't accept it. I mean, sure, I didn't have to punch her. Would I necessarily tell my kids? But would I be really upset with them if they did? No, I don't think I would. And some people don't like that philosophy. Some people tell me that I'm a bad parent. My kids have not punched anyone, for the record, just alhamdulillah, they have not. But I won't take, my daughter wears hijab and plays soccer at very high levels. You know, mashallah, my sons play volleyball and basketball, and they know because our identity, our integrity is not for sale. It's not up. I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. And I'm not gonna pretend that I have to be, you know, someone once said to me that after I tweeted that whole incident out about what happened to me, well, you should have been a better person. I'm like, fam, I was 11. Like, you know, I was also a child, but now I don't want to be misguided by people that don't understand an experience of what dealing with racism or Islamophobia looks like. Don't tell me what, because it's convenient for you, that I don't react. You know, they were saying something like, you just sound like an angry brown woman. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much what it is. I have a softness that I reserve for my faith, my family, my loved ones. They get it. If you come at me, you don't get my softness. You don't get that self-love that I have. You're not entitled to it. And so people out there, and this goes back to media and the work that I do. I mean, those that know me personally know what a soft heart I have. But if you see me in my work, you'll be like, what's wrong with this lady? Like, this woman's mad at everything. It's, yeah, because it's the systems of injustice that make me mad. And Muslims need to be uncomfortable and angry about what's oppressing, whether it's anti-Blackness, whether it's, you know, what's happening, the marginalization further of women in society, whether it's abuse against women. Like, these are things that should make us pretty upset. We come from a faith that did not allow injustice. So I don't, like, we can't just be sitting back in Ramadan eating our samosas and be like all good about it, because it's not. People are being murdered while they're running in the United States. It's not a good time for us to be, you know, we should be praying, we should be mobilizing. And these are huge parts of what I do and what I bring my faith to what I do, because we're not part of a culture of faith and tradition that allows oppression. I'm sorry, we don't. I mean, there's many, many ways to fight the fight, alhamdulillah. There's not one way. The path is wide. It's straight, but it's wide, right? So let's just say I have a brother and he is very different than me, mashallah. He's really patient in some ways, but that doesn't mean that the way that I do things is wrong or what he does is wrong. We're just different, but ultimately we have the same vision and the same goal. There's just different ways to get there. So if you want to write a letter about it, if you want to tweet about it, if you want to engage somebody in conversation about it, if you want to educate somebody and it's not too taxing or emotionally laborious, then I support all those ways. Um, I get in a lot of conversation with people talking about racism, and if I feel like I can in that moment, I will engage and I will do my best. I'll provide resources. I will say, read this person. You know, the way that we interact with other people, knowing our privilege, it's really important. And I think it it really makes us sort of stand to be good character. And essentially, inshallah, that's what we want to do, is be of good character.
Mm. So take us through. It's a lot to unpack about what you said, but one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was after your second year of playing college soccer,
Mm-hmm.
that you decided, and that choice of you deciding to wear your hijab really kind of just changed the whole course of your career and your life, even at that
Mm-hmm.
particular point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wearing hijab was always something I knew I wanted to do. I never talked to my parents about it. My mom did, but she wore like a turban type of kerchief style, like they do in Egypt, and she, it was easier for her in surgery to do it that way, and that's what she did. But I never really talked to them, and I remember going to a conference in Chicago, and I put it on, and we're driving back through like Detroit, Windsor, on that boring stretch of highway that's like really long towards Toronto. And we were living here. And I just remember thinking, at what point do I take this off? Like, what point do I do this? I didn't think about soccer. Maybe if I thought about soccer, I might not have made the choice that I made,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't matter to me. I was like, no, I'm going to do this. I was 20, and I just didn't take it off. And I didn't really discuss it with anyone. I mean, we drove home. It's about 10 hours. And my dad's like, you're going to take it off. And then I was like, no. And it was really funny because I had not only had soccer camp already started, because camp in varsity and systems in college and university starts in August. So we were full out. I called the coach and I said, well, I have to tell you something. And she was like, okay. And I was like, I'm doing this thing. And I told her, and she was quiet. And then she says, okay, well, good luck with that.
Mm.
And I was like, wow, it wasn't more, it wasn't less. That's just what it was. And I was like, okay. And in a way, I think I felt, now when I'm looking back on it, maybe I was relieved that I didn't have to go and answer all the questions, because I still played club soccer in addition to that. And that coach was like, what are you doing? Can't you just take it off? Like, my teammates were frustrated because they relied on me, but then I would get self-conscious and I tried to wear a turban, but this is way before sports jobs. So I'm just like wrapping the best way I can, and I have very thick hair, and it wasn't working out. And then I was so focused on, will it fall off, that I wasn't focused on my game. And it was just a disaster. And eventually I took myself out of that space because I couldn't handle it. I was 20, and I remember that summer in 96, I remember Zinedine Zidane had won the World Cup. And I remember watching that in my head and looking at this Muslim man. Whether or not he was very active in the community wasn't the point, but I just remember that stirring something inside me. Like, he does both. Why can't I do both? And I think what I get back to, and I wrote about this and I've always talked about it, I shouldn't have had to choose between hijab and sports. And it's not a choice that I think any athlete should have to make, which is why I do the work that I do. And I'm very grateful. Like, I've been reporting on FIFA. I reported on FIBA. I was the first sports journalist in North America to talk about the hijab ban in mainstream media. I wrote about it for Vice. And then a couple of years later, when they finally rescinded the ban, I wrote about it again. Met incredible sisters along the way, and got to meet people, got to just expand the conversation. And this isn't just about hijab. It's just about Muslim women, and the way that people are so quick to opine about what Muslim women wear. It's this obsession with Muslim women specifically, what we wear, what we don't wear, why do we wear it, why doesn't she wear it? And something that was really important for me to see was in the Rio 2016 Olympics. I saw a photo of Dalia Muhammad, who's a double gold winning, hurdler, and Ibtihaj Muhammad, who are not related, but like everyone's name is Muhammad, right? So like it's all good. And they're standing side by side in sisterhood in Islam. And one wears like short shorts and a sports bra top to do her competition. The other one is literally fully covered. But that was so important to see, that we're not a monolith. And the work that I do advocating for Muslim women in sports and writing about it, collecting the histories, talking to women all over the world that face very similar challenges. Even though they're all like the women in Nigeria face similar challenges to women in Afghanistan, who face similar challenges to women in Bosnia. Like you wouldn't believe to the stuff that women in South America are going through. And it's just so, in Haiti, like the difficulties that women go through. So it was about that for me, very much about it. And so just to get back to like university, I started to row instead. And rowing didn't care. Rowing didn't have an exception. And I had rowed when I was in middle school and I loved it. And I said, I'm going to try this. And it was a distraction for me. Alhamdulillah, like I had a lot of time on my hands all of a sudden. And I remember being awake on the water in the middle of practice when Fajr started.
Wow.
That's how early we were on the water, and it was pitch dark. And we would stop, and I prayed in the boat because I didn't want to miss my slot. But I remember my teammates would be like, "That's really fast. Are you sure you're done?" I'm like, "Well, y'all shut up. Like I'm done. Like, okay, let's go." Right. Like, but to pray like literally in a boat, because I would be on the water for the entire time of Fajr was pretty wild. And then, I rowed in my third and fourth year, and spring and summer, spring sessions, and traveled to Philadelphia for the Schuylkill River regattas, was in Rochester, Montreal, Guelph. Like it was, but it still didn't fill the hole that not having soccer had left. It hadn't, because soccer was my first love. It was.
So talk about your love for soccer, and how that love for soccer has transitioned into the way that you write, and your love for sports and your passion for writing.
Well, I think sports is just a vehicle for a lot of things. It's a tool for empowerment. It's a way to storytell. Like I am a storyteller essentially. I'm very lucky that alhamdulillah women give me, and I keep talking about women, and I hope the brothers out there are like, why did you talk about brothers? Like there's so many people to talk about brothers, right? Like there's not a lot of amplification of the amazing work that women do. And let me tell you, there's far more sports among women than people even realize in their communities. And those stories are what I love. And I remember a family friend who was very close. She came to Halifax. Like my father had adopted her husband, and he's from Gaza in Palestine. And she didn't speak a word of English, but man, the sister loved swimming. She loved swimming. That's the one thing they had. The one freedom they had in Gaza was the beach. She loved it. So once a week we had a swimming session for ladies only that was organized, and the ladies would go. She was the first one in and the last one out. And it was a means. And I remember thinking sport and recreation is really a way to connect people. And I've always thought that way. My mother was very active. She was like the table tennis champion of her university and of her college. And she always worked out with my dad. He taught her how to play squash and badminton. And we did that as a family. And just, I think when we get into situations where there's a rigidity in faith, where people are like, well, a sister shouldn't do this and do this and do this. There's this sense of control that I think comes down. And instead of looking at someone's intention, like our bodies are all an amanat. Their bodies are all from God. We're supposed to keep them. Not everybody has the luxury to be able to afford an all women's gym membership that you can go and be like, not everybody has that. So if women are out there jogging or riding their bikes, like brothers don't got to come up in here and, be giving us lectures on, like, everyone's trying to do the best they can. If there's a sister out there trying to play basketball, will it kill you to support her? A young girl trying to be out there looking at, so many great examples we have of women, like the second round draft pick for the WNBA this year, Satu Sabali is a Muslim woman. She's a Black Muslim sister. Like Are we going to get up and be like, no, that's wrong, this is bad, this is bad? Like, are there ways that we can improve ourselves in that? And storytelling and telling these stories and everyone's challenges, they're a really important part of history. And my concern was always the erasure from history, and the way that, because there's not enough Muslim folks in sports media, is the way that the stories will be forgotten. So I've been lucky to make friends, alhamdulillah, with some really notable academics around the world. I mentioned Laurent Dubois, Jean Williams in the UK. She invited me to the National Football Museum in Manchester, where I literally gave a presentation on the ban of hijab and how that happened and how it unraveled. And also just, like how currently the French football, like the Fédération du Football Française, which is the FFF, which is the national football organization in France, to this day doesn't allow hijab in soccer, not for coaches, for medics, for referees, for players. So it is literally like not allowing a huge portion of the population to be involved in soccer. These stories are all political. So for those people that are like, don't make sports political, like, what are you talking about? I've never heard an athlete that I've spoken to who's either racialized or from a marginalized group say they don't want political sports, because our sports are always political. Go tell Muhammad Ali that you didn't want your sports to be political. Like, what are you saying? For people with the most privilege in society, they don't want it because they don't have to deal with it. We do. And it's a platform. So I have a platform, alhamdulillah. I can talk about abuse of soccer players in Haiti or Afghanistan, or what happens around the world, or the way that Pakistani women cricket players are not being supported the way they need to. I can talk about how in Saudi Arabia, women weren't allowed to ride bikes, or I can talk about how now women in Saudi Arabia are allowed to watch soccer in stadiums. Women in Iran are not allowed. Like, I can talk about these things that are part of sports history, but it's almost like they don't get the amplification that they deserve. And there's so many incredible stories about this, like how Muslim athletes fast in Ramadan. Like, it's phenomenal. It's not that complicated, because every year the media has this big old, this year, without exception, there wasn't any, because there's no sports happening right now. But there's this big, how do they do it? How do Muslim athletes fast? Like, y'all, we've got to figure it out. They fought wars while they were fasting. Everybody calm down. We know how to do this. You know what I'm saying? But that's the thing. So these conversations always, I felt I needed to be a part of. And absolutely, I've injected myself into conversations and corrected people where I'm like, I'm sorry, you're wrong about this. You should look at this reference and check out this person, because you're wrong. And then people say, well, wait a minute, what is she talking about? And the one thing that famous sports writers don't like is to be told that they're wrong about something. So I actually don't care if they're embarrassed. Like, I'll reach out privately, but if they sort of ignore, I'll be like, look, this framing of this is not okay. You're actually factually incorrect about this. Like when Nike, just for example, released its sports hijab, we had sports outlets, a big one, saying this is the first sports hijab. And I was like, no, the first sports hijab was Capsters, came out in 2000. So no, that's totally incorrect. And and this is the thing, because we're not involved in the storytelling, in the capturing, this is how history gets distorted. And I don't like historical distortions, so.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, I'm just listening as you're telling all of these stories. I'm just taking it all in. No, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. And one of your interviews, you talked about there's a couple of ways that we can change the narrative on these things. One is having more diverse people on the inside, on as far as administrators, as far as staff people. One thing I want to focus on right now, which is part of your the thing that you do, which is journalism, and the audience of that is how diverse stories that they can engage in. So you talk about number one, diversifying their sports intake or their news intake. Can you elaborate a little bit about that, and where we get our sources of news and media, and how we should be in more choicey in where we get our information from?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because I wish I was asked that question more to elaborate on it. What I meant by that was, a lot of the time we have a tendency to follow the big accounts like Bleacher Report, and with no offense to any of these places, Sports Illustrated, like the big social media accounts on Snapchat and whatnot. And I think we need to be really careful because sometimes they have really great storytellers and people. And when I meant by diversify, I meant in terms of gender and I meant in terms of race, because I have not seen, with the exception of very notable few, write about race in a way that's meaningful. If you want to learn about anti-Blackness and how to combat it in sport, read from somebody with that lived experience. Read, because where they're getting their education from is probably very profound and meaningful. That's what I mean. I'm not saying that white people shouldn't talk about sports, but literally they're 90% of the industry. They're always talking about sports. They're always opining. They'll never get their platform taken away. And what's problematic is people who are from marginalized communities and like on the margins of spaces are always made to feel that they're fighting for room. And that's something that people in the higher positions make us feel there's room for everybody. If you share a story with me, want me to look at something, I will absolutely help you out. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't take away from my work. And this is the problem with sports media, is that well, right now it's a very difficult industry, right? You see a lot of good places like Deadspin, for example, was a site that I really respected. I knew a lot of the women journalists that were there. I think that, it's very important to keep that. Like there's one place that I will say publicly that I do not trust and I never will is Barstool Sports, because the history of Barstool treating women has been atrocious. And just because they have a CFO who is a woman doesn't mean that it excuses all of their previous behavior. Like absolutely horrible commentary, and we can't allow this. If you support a place that does that kind of work, you're part of the problem. I mean, Sports Illustrated is usually really good. I've done work at The Guardian. I've worked for, The Telegraph in the UK. I've done writing for them. They have their own women's side that does stuff. I think it's just really important. Like Dave Zirin, love his work. Obviously, the co-host that I spoke of, Dr. Brenda Elsey, Jessica Luther, Lindsay Gibbs, Hamal Javeri of For the Win, USA Today. She's somebody that I really, really appreciate. In hockey, there's, Jashvina Shah. I could go on, like, Perdita Felician in Canada is a commentator. She just wrote a book. There's so many. And I think we don't remember, we think of women as an afterthought sometimes in sports. And I think that's pretty dangerous. And we shouldn't do that. But also sometimes people who aren't, a lot of the time in sports media, we'll see professional athletes transition to become media folks, but they don't have to be that. Like how many beat reporters on local US stations were ever athletes? They're just like some dude who got a job in sports media and is suddenly an authority on it. So like, let's just be real and diversify in terms of independent journalism is always a great idea. There's a lot of really good newsletters. My friend Lindsay Gibbs has Power Plays, which really looks at issues. She used to be at Think Progress, really looks at issues of, the idea of why should the, US women's national team get more money? Why is it not just so simplistic of, well, the men bring home more revenue? She's like, well, actually, women brought home more jersey sales. And, if you look at, like, she'll just unpack it in a way that's accessible, because sometimes the information can be confusing. My friend Meg Linehan, who writes for The Athletic, she's the only full-time women's soccer writer in the entire country. Like these are people, Stephanie Yang is at SB Nation. There's a lot of really great, like Morgan Campbell is a very good friend of mine based in Toronto. Great, fantastic writer, smart. There's some really good and notable sports writers. Habiba Hussain writes for Slam magazine. Really love her work. We both found out we were Muslims and got so excited. Let me tell you, there was another one she used to be at Sports Illustrated. Her name's Ala Boulaim. She's no longer doing that right now because they've furloughed or they've made a lot of changes at Sports Illustrated. But like, I love her work. Like Raweda Abdulaziz writes for Huffington Post, but she's done some really, really important work on Muslim women in swimming and that kind of stuff. And, we get people who what better to talk about our community and notable athletes, right? Who better to do that than people from those communities? That's just the way that I feel about it. Because it's meaningful. Like I spent a lot of time early in my career from an academic standpoint, critiquing rather, work about Muslim women in sports. That's the reason I started doing this, because I'm not having some guy who doesn't know anything about Islam and anything about us talk about us in a way that's just unhelpful. And that's honestly why it was a form of rebellion and a form of empowerment at the same time. I'm going to start to try to compile these stories and tell them in a way that's more sincere, to be honest. And, you know, I think that that's where it came from for me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, a concept that you talk about a lot is allies, having allies and allyship. What are some of the ways that we as an audience, we as consumers of media, can help and become allies for people like Bilqis Abdul Qadir and other Muslims who have gone through certain challenges like that? So how can we become better allies in helping evangelize these type of stories and these type of causes?
Well, I think one of the most important things to note about what happened with FIBA, and in addition to Bilqis and Indira Kalyo, who were two women that really started the petition and then spread it, Indira, and this is part of the history that I want to talk about. It wasn't just Bilqis, it was Indira who really kickstarted that petition also, and so got it going around to different basketball players all over the world. So it was really the sense of connection. And if we're playing sports and we're Muslim women, we will find each other. And that's the way the community works, and that's what happened. And to support Bilqis is to listen to her story, is to, you know, get her to come speak, is to pay her. This is the other thing that I'm going to talk about. People call me and say, sister, come to our mosque and do your work. This is what I do for a living. They're like, oh, sister, it'll be sadqa. I'm like, first of all, y'all let me decide what my sadqa is going to be. And secondly, I put a lot of work into this and I deserve to be remunerated. They'll pay some brother who's not Muslim to come and perform comedy for $5,000, but we got to do this work for free. Like, no. I'm sorry. And I get to decide who I help and in which ways I help the community. And after years and years and years of doing that, alhamdulillah, like I'm good. Let me decide where my charity is, right? That's one way to support people. Get them to come talk at your schools. Get them to come and teach. I do a whole segment on the history of Muslims in sport. I can do that. I can teach that. I go to universities. I'm often invited to go do that. And in terms of being a specific ally, I think that listening and being careful with where you're getting the information is one thing, but also listening to the stories of those women and understanding that not every same Muslim woman is going to have the same experience. That is very important to understand. There's 500 million of us in the world at least. We all have different experiences. So, you know, that's also what I mean in diversifying. I think that in terms of what people can do is that this is something that I stand behind very importantly. I don't talk about what I'm not an expert in. And we know this from our great religion. We know that the learned teachers in our religion will tell you, if they ask you a question, or sorry, you ask them a question, they'll say to you, I don't know. That's the sign of humility. That's the sign of knowledge, of telling somebody I don't know and I'm not ashamed that I don't know. I can try to find out for you. That's a good thing. If someone asks you a question about Islam, and if you are Muslim and you don't know the answer, don't make up stuff. That's not helpful. Don't do that, especially about Muslim women in sports or Muslims in sports. Please, y'all, don't do that. Just say, I don't know, and find out. Ask you, like you're an expert, you've got work professionally, reach out to people, ask athletes, ask people in sports media. Don't just try to make up an answer because A, you're not helping, and B, the answer is probably wrong. So I think there's that. And in terms of doing those things and just being careful about where you get your information, I think is really important too. And also, if there's a campaign happening, sign that petition. People are like, oh, it's a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. Literally, FIBA gave Bilqis Abdul Qadir an audience because she brought a petition of 150,000 signatures on it. It's not a waste of time. Write a letter, call your state or local representatives, say this is not okay. Call the school board that's not letting that little girl play with her hijab on. Call them and say, why is this happening? Your voice will make a difference. You sharing on Facebook, you retweeting that story will make a difference. Those are things that we can actually do to help. And I've seen them in the course of my career absolutely change policy. I've seen young girls, because of social media, being able to share their stories. I've seen people, but also be intentional about it. Many years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, I wrote a story on my blog and maybe it was probably the best piece of investigative journalism that I've done. There was this photo going viral about a soccer team that stood in solidarity with a player who wasn't allowed to play. So they all wore hijab and took a photo. And I was like, oh, that's nice. What happened after? Literally all they did was take a photo. So I started to ask questions. I said, well, what happened after the photo was taken? They all took off their hijabs and ran on the field and left her sitting on the bench. So I called, yeah, and nobody wanted to talk about that. So I said, wait a minute. So this was very performative. I do understand that they were young women, right? They were young kids in early high school. And I'm like, but wait a second. So that was all just to get your retweets and likes, and that's it? Like, what about her? What about the policy? What about the coach? I called the Athletic Association in Colorado, and they're like, you were the first person that's called us about this. And I was like, where are all these people that are retweeting? Can't you just call them and say, fix this? It's not a difficult problem. Include this person. Like recently in Ohio, like there was a runner named Nora Alexandra, and people started calling. And as a result of people's attention and calling and really advocating, they changed their policy. And this is really important to note. So that soccer player back there in Colorado, she never played because people weren't doing the minimum. The very minimum is retweeting something, but know the story behind what you're doing. You know, and I ended up reaching out to a very big sports platform and said, that's not the story here. You should stop spreading like this feel good thing, because it didn't get resolved for that girl. Made everybody else feel like a champion, but what happened to her? And I'm like, I'm not trying to be negative or cynical. I'm trying to say, let's really fix the problem, not put a Band-Aid on it. And if you want to be a good ally, Band-Aids are not the solution. Like, figure out what the cause is and fix it. So there's that. There's a couple questions too that I'm getting.
Yes, yeah, we're going to. That's exactly what we're doing.
Oh, okay.
We're going to transition to Q&A. I don't know if you're getting the same ones here, so I'll let you take the first one, and then I'll go, and then you go. We'll alternate.
Okay, so Zinedine Zidane and his influence. I talked about that. Who is my all-time favorite soccer player? Well, men's soccer player would be Zidane. Absolutely. I think his style of play is majestic. He was confident and he had a way with the ball. He was fearless in terms of his roulette, his ball handling skills, his Champions League goal against Bayer Leverkusen. I think it was 98, was like still probably one of my favorite goals of all time. And for women, right now, I would say Nadia Nadim, who I love desperately. She's an Afghan refugee whose home is Denmark, and she plays for Paris Saint-Germain at PSG. And I love her. She's also in medical school, and she's just extended her contract. I mean, I have a lot of women's soccer players that I love, but she's up there, and she's a fantastic, fantastic human being.
Okay, so the next question that we have is, should more Muslim athletes become activists? For example, Mesut Ozil was known for his activism and charity. He recently criticized the Chinese government regarding the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims. Should more Muslim athletes become activists?
Well, we have like the histories, as I mentioned, of some really formidable Muslim athletes who already have, like Muhammad Ali has done this. Like Ibtihaj Muhammad was really important before Rio. She spoke out a lot against Muslim bans, and he was very, very honest. Mesut Ozil spoke about that. But I mean, the thing with Mesut Ozil that is really important is that doing what he did to speak about the Chinese government. Yaya Toure, who is a footballer that I love, who's from the Ivory Coast, said that he shouldn't have done that. And is it coincidental that Yaya Toure plays in China? So there's always this underlining tone of what is somebody about to say. Also, Mesut Ozil has known to be, very close friends with Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, the same person who has imprisoned a lot of journalists. And as somebody who's aware of those things and is aware of lack of mobility and freedom of speech for journalists, I find that very problematic. I mean, the thing is, it's not going to be one answer. There's not going to be one specific way to do this. Like, would I like Mohamed Salah, to speak out about stuff? He spoke out on International Women's Day about the treatment of women was very important, because the country of Egypt has a lot of, public sort of sexual harassment cases against it. These things are important. And I would like to see a lot of Muslim men with huge, huge profiles, like Mohammed Salah, like Sadio Mane, like these people that have incredible opportunity to say things. And Masoud Tazil, to his respect, talking about Uyghur Muslims is a very big thing, because it's not something, unfortunately, we see very much in the news. So him talking about it was a good step. He just carries a lot. It's complicated is the answer. There's, I want to see people do it, but I see a lot of like Muslim women out there, like Bilqis will be out there talking about things and advocating. And this is in my experience, we've always seen Muslim women doing this kind of work. We will always see Muslim women in grassroots movements. They just might not get the attention that they deserve.
So to further your point, right, what you're talking about right now, what can we as men in the Muslim community, how can we elevate the platform for women? How can we help soften the blow of people saying that, young sisters shouldn't be playing in soccer, they shouldn't be playing sports in general? So what is it that we as men can do to support and elevate the cause for women and be more advocates for them?
Well, I think it's not only for young girls. I mean, take your wives to the WNBA games, take them, help nurture their love. Like, I don't know how many aunties I know that were praying for Liverpool on a Champions League final match because of Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane. Like, help encourage that love. Like, sport, everyone does it differently, encourage if you've got a niece or somebody in your family or a daughter or somebody who wants to take refereeing and learn how to be a ref. Like, we don't see enough Muslims at all in officiating positions, whatever the sport is. You don't have to play necessarily, but to be an adjudicator or a referee or be in sports management. Like, what a great thing and what a great opportunity for business minded to get into that kind of thing. Combine the love of sports with the knowledge in business, sports medicine, physiotherapy. Like, there's so many ways, and just to be a fan. Sports also accords us an opportunity just to love something and to follow it. Like, my mother's a huge hockey fan. Like, she's a lot to watch sports with. Like, she went through this Cam Newton phase, and oh my gosh, like, my mom was a lot. Like, you couldn't call her. She'd be like, "Don't call me, the Panthers are playing," and she would just hang up. Like she's yeah, mashallah, she's a lot. So my poor dad's a Vikings fan, so he was just sad all the time. But I think there's joy to be had and to be held, and there's so many different ways that people can become healthy and become in like sports, not an obsessive way, but in a good way. And there's no reason why men can't help that. And support women journalists, read their work, support just generally share stories of them, because there's a lot now. If there's struggles of them, share those and see, like I said, how you can help. And that's something that I'll always feel is important. And like people like Nadia Nadim, who are in there, like a lot of the French women's national team or soccer players. Asisata Shawala plays for Nigeria, and she's fantastic and does a lot of really good work in Nigeria with developmental camps. And it's stuff that I think we tend to overlook. Like, there was a huge case 2 years ago in Afghanistan of the women being abused at the hands of a man, the president of the federation. I wish more Muslim men would have paid attention to that. And but that's what it is. So like, there's so many ways, Hanif. Oh my gosh, I could give you a list to get involved and to amplify and support in a genuine way. And even if your local masajid has sports time for boys, do they have sports time for girls? Do they? Is there a gym teacher? If you don't want like a male coach, why don't you hire a female coach to come and get time? It's easy to advocate. We just don't think about how easy it is. Is there equal time? Is there opportunity for sisters to see people like Bilqis speak, people like Batuli Kamara, who's a Yukon player? Like, there's so many glorious stories. Like, there's surfing for Muslim women, there's swimming, there's, draw from the sunnah. Swimming is a sunnah. Archery is a sunnah. Like, it doesn't say a sunnah for men. That's not how I understand sunnah. It's a sunnah for everybody. Run, horseback ride. Like, Get in there, support people in that. And if you don't have a daughter or sister, it doesn't mean that you don't have to care. You don't have a wife, donate some money to a women's shelter that's providing those exercises for somebody. Hanif, my friend, brother, there's so many ways, so many ways.
Alhamdulillah. Now, I can't let you go without asking this question. Your handle, Foodie Bed Sheets, where did it come from?
My handle on Twitter is my name, but Foodie Bed Sheets is my Instagram handle. And one of the things that I kind of went under when I started to play hijab in an adult league, started to play soccer with hijab in an adult league, there was a woman who was on the pitch and she's like, "What is that? Is that bed sheets? What's on your head?" And I was like, wow. I was like, you just gave me my name. And that's literally where it comes from. Like, some people are like, "Are you talking about linens in your bed? Like, what are you talking about?" And some people thought it was like I had little soccer balls all over my sheets. That's not it. It's because my hijab was referred to in a pejorative way. But I said, you know what? I'm going to take that and I'm going to use it for me. So that's where that came from.
Alhamdulillah. We're out of time. I could talk to you all night long about these type of subjects. This is, some of these are my passion personally. But we appreciate you stopping by, being a part of the interview series of A Daily Dose. You definitely provide us with tons of resources and knowledge about the plight of women and marginalized people in sports. So we thank you. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. Where can people find your work, and where can they follow you at on your social media platforms before we let you out?
Thank you so much for having me, Alhamdulillah. This is great. And thank you so much for having this conversation in Ramadan, because the work is still happening and what you do is really important. Like, I love this connectivity, interconnectivity, because there's not a lot of us out there, but I'm glad we're there. We're definitely there. You can find me on Twitter. I tweet a lot. I tweet about my kids and I tweet about sports. So that's pretty much what I tweet about. It's _ Shireen Ahmed, my first and last name _ and then on Instagram, it's just @FoodieBedSheets. I'm also the Burn It All Down. So I think the handle is Burn It Down Pod on Twitter. So if you just actually type in Burn It All Down podcast, you'll find us. And we're on Instagram also. I'm there every week. I took last week off and I'm going to take the weekend of Eid off, inshallah, from the podcast. But other than that, we're there every week talking about a bunch of stuff. And I have a really great interview with Jawahir Robley coming up, who is a Somali-British referee. And she's the first FA level 2 referee that's Muslim and a Muslim woman in all of England. So I finally got her on the podcast. I've been bugging her for a year and she's so busy, but now everyone's at home. So I'm interviewing everybody I can, Hanif, everybody.
Wonderful, wonderful. Like I said, I mean, I can't say enough about your experience and your life story and the work that you do, not only for women, but for Muslims and for just human beings, period. So may Allah continue to bless you. Enjoy the rest of your Ramadan. And to the audience out there, I know on the East Coast it's time to break fast. Assalamu alaikum. And Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair, and please keep me in your du'as.
We will. Thank you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.